Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar. This is a pretty serious video because I really think the implications of what's about to happen in the next few months is going to change a lot of the internet and maybe even the way we interact with each other down in the road. Now, to give you an idea and a context and a primer for this, a pretty serious event happened in the last several days. For somebody that has no idea about what's going on, if you lived in North America, there was a pretty massive assassination that took place. This assassination involved a individual known as Charlie Kirk, who was a infamous sort of a right-wing, I guess you could say, political commentator, a debater, if you will. The guy was the leader of Turning Point, which was one of the biggest chapters of, young political action in the country. Now, obviously, his life was lost. He got shot, pretty much fatally, died almost instantly from my understanding. And it was actually a video that if, you were basically on any social media a few days ago, you saw it. Now, I'm not here to get into the nitty-gritty of these assassinations. There's plenty of other channels for it. Nor am I here to get into the, entirety of the political debate. At the end of the day, somebody lost their life, and I do genuinely feel bad for that. I don't think, arguments or debates are solved with violence. I think once you get to that stage, there is a lot of bad things about to come. You're talking about things like civil warfare. You're talking about, just an escalation like that should always be condemned. We should never be getting to, actual violence, before we debate with words, so to speak. Now, of course, obviously, the guy is dead. I've seen his family. You had little children. The guy was my age, so it kind of hits me a little bit. But again, to go further into it, one of the things that sort of came out was obviously who was the guy that shot him. So they actually did end up catching the shooter, which appeared to be Tyler Robinson. Now, what was really interesting about this during this time was that there was a lot of speculation as to who this person was. Obviously, he wasn't caught immediately. The individual that was caught was apparently this older gentleman. That individual was a man known as George Zinn. And of course, this guy wasn't the actual shooter, but of course, in a rapid turn of events into what is one of the wildest stories of 2025, this guy has been charged with apparently possessing child insane shit to witness, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, goddamn. If there was a bingo game we were playing, this, you would never be able to guess what's happening. Now, when the shooting had actually occurred, multiple angles had come out, and one of the angles apparently showcased what appeared to be a actual shooter running across the rooftops. Now, it's kind of hard to tell. I guess that would be it, though it feels more like I'm looking at a speck than the actual shooting. Now, of course, as this had happened, more and more information had come out, and of course, the news agencies alongside showcased the actual shooter running on this rooftop. So you could see him right over here, running, and then of course, he's going to eventually have to jump down, possibly, hopefully break a leg during this. So of course, he's, just hanging off, gets down a little bit, jumps, kind of survives that, limps a little bit, and then runs away. So obviously this triggered about a 24 to 48 hour manhunt where the FBI, Salt Lake City in this case, was involved trying to get everybody to pass information on this shooter. Now, at this moment in time, the FBI director, Kash Patel, was now, there's a lot of words that are used when discussing people that are incompetent leaders or people in power. And one of those words that I've seen floated around is DEI hires. When they often use, when the allegation is diversity, equity, and inclusion is picked before meritocracy when picking somebody. I think without a doubt, this fucking guy might be the biggest example of a DEI hire, because nowhere did the FBI actually really do their job. At the end of the day, what eventually led to this kid being caught was eventually, when an image was released, the kid's father ended up actually, identifying him, and basically he convinced his child to turn themselves in to the FBI, to the actual law enforcement agencies. So if it wasn't for the family, this kid might have actually gotten away with it, because for a while, there really wasn't much activity going on with the Premier League of law enforcement agencies. So just before 10 p.m. that night, Robinson, his dad, and a close friend who previously worked in law enforcement drove together from Washington, Utah to Washington County Sheriff's Office in Hurricane. Sergeant Lance Alfred, a spokesperson to the sheriff's office, told ABC News. So yeah, if it wasn't for the family friend, this guy might have actually gotten away with it. So again, because of this entire thing, one of the reasons why I didn't really talk about this is because A, it's not in my wheelhouse. I don't really jump into it. The only reason I'm talking about it now at all is because I feel like this whole assassination is being used as a way for the government to start shifting its focus to a lot of areas where I think they can start policing our speech. I think they're really jumping into a lot of social media networks where, you know, for the last few months, we've talked about things like chat control. We've talked about the government hating things like encryption. We've talked about the government's surveillance apparatus becoming ever and ever larger. And, you know, with third-party organizations like Palantir, which these, you know, federal agencies love to tap into, love to partner with, I really don't see any of these collaborations working at all in comparison to, again, the shooter's family friend and dad turning them in. You know, really effective use of our tax dollars and really good showcase as to why we should let the government fucking govern us harder, daddy, if it doesn't actually amount to much happening. So what's really kind of insane about this too is everyone, I felt like, as this was occurring, was trying to identify, you know, what the political leanings of the shooter was, you know, whether this person was a left-leaning, you know, terrorist or a right-leaning terrorist, because ultimately, violence to effect political gains, that's the definition of terrorism. It felt like people were more interested in picking any side. I feel like everyone, you know, aside from, you know, Charlie's wife, and of course, obviously, Candace Owens, many people were looking at this guy's death as a way to push a narrative or push some level of control. Again, I will say, Charlie Kirk is not a man that I personally agreed with on a lot of things, and I'm sure vice versa that would have been met. But I always prefer debating somebody as opposed to, you know, enjoying and reveling in the death of people. That is just disgusting. And if you find that wrong, then you should just leave. Simple as that. I like to be a reasonable, moderate individual, not a fucking nut job on the internet, okay? That's simple as that. But speaking of nut jobs, we like to use the term radicalization. So in a court document that was released, there was a few messages that came between Robinson and their girlfriend, who appeared to be this transgender individual. Now, these chat logs are kind of cringe to listen to, but these were things that came out, and these were chat logs allegedly performed on Discord. So to give you an idea, there was a lot of shit that came out. When investigating this individual, there was a rifle that was found with etched bullets that apparently had words like, nice bulge, notices bulge, ooh, what's this? The second cartridge had, hey fascist, catch, and then of course arrow symbols. Third cartridge was, oh Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Ciao Ciao. Fourth cartridge, if you read this, you are gay, Lamau. So yeah, I'm telling you, when they were reading this on the news, I'm sure there was a lot of people who were called by families asking, you know, them what the fuck ooh meant, and what was notice bulge. That must have been an awkward conversation. But to give you an idea, between Robinson and their roommate, who apparently they were allegedly romantically involved with, the chat log went like this. I'm still okay, my love, but I'm stuck in Orem for a little while longer yet. Shouldn't be long until I can come home. But I gotta grab my rifle still. To be honest, I had hoped to keep this secret till I died of old age. I'm sorry to involve you. And the roommate was, you weren't the one who did it, right? I am. I'm sorry. I thought they caught the person. No. They grabbed some crazy old dude, then interrogated someone in similar clothing. I had planned to grab my rifle from my drop point shortly after, but most of the side of town got locked down. It's quiet, almost enough to get out, but there's one vehicle lingering. Why? Why did I do it? Yeah. I've had enough of this hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out. If I'm able to grab my rifle unseen, I will have left no evidence. Going to attempt to retrieve it again, hopefully they've moved on. I haven't seen anything about them finding it. How long have you been planning it? A bit over a week, I believe. I can get close to it, but there's a squad car parked right by it. I think they've already swept that spot, but I don't want to chance it. Robinson goes, I'm wishing I had circled back and grabbed it as soon as I got to my vehicle. I'm worried what my old man would do if I didn't bring back Grandpa's rifle. I don't know if it had a serial number, but it wouldn't trace to me. I wouldn't worry about prints. I had to leave it in a bush where I changed outfits. Didn't have the ability or time to bring it with. I might have to abandon it and hope they don't find prints. How the fuck will I explain losing it to my old man? So, yeah, these were a set of Discord messages that were shared, and people were obviously kind of criticizing whether this was real or not. And look, I don't know if the government would fake Discord messages as they release them to the public in court documentation, but again, anything is possible in today's fucking upside down, topsy-turvy world that we goddamn live in. So of course, look, if it's one thing I know about Charlie Kirk is that he valued debate and he valued freedom of speech, and if it's one thing he didn't agree with was the moniker of hate speech. Well, it seems as if his side of the aisle is now branding hate speech as a real definition, even though this is the side that claimed that hate speech really isn't a real thing. And the thing about hate speech, when you look at it from the free speech angle, is hate speech could really be anything. Who defines what it actually is? Is it an arbitrary limitation to free speech? Let's listen to some of the free speech party members talk about hate speech.
Charlie said, that there was no such thing as hate speech. He obviously, no one anticipated what happened to Charlie, but you have always been...
So the Pam Bondi, who famously cannot even handle this Epstein investigation, goes, hate speech that crosses the line into threats of violence is not protected by the First Amendment. It's a crime. For far too long, we've watched the radical left normalize threats, call for assassinations, and cheer on political violence. Now, thank God for things like community notes, because they say even the Constitution protects most violent speech. The Supreme Court rules it's legal to justify or celebrate violence or advocate or teach the duty necessary and proprietary of it, but not incitement to or imminent violence, such as telling a mob with weapons to kill someone. Like recently, Jimmy Kimmel was completely taken down, and apparently even Donald Trump here, the president, was talking about taking away licenses for TV networks who are apparently negative towards him. Now, when you've got the government coming in and basically taking away a license through the FCC based on, again, how they talk about the administration, that I think is a bit of an assault on free speech, simply because the government is getting involved and they're not, this should not be happening, okay? When you have a network and you have evening shows and all they do is hit Trump, that's all they do. If you go back, I guess they haven't had a conservative one in years or something. When you go back and take a look, all they do is hit Trump. They're licensed. They're not allowed to do that. And look, ultimately, I think a lot of these platforms have the choice of saying whatever it is that they want. If the administration doesn't like it, I don't think they should really be considering taking away licenses for it. It almost seems like we're headed towards state-sponsored propaganda. But again, I think when it comes to a guy like Charlie Kirk, I'm sure even he would agree that platforms have all the right to say what they need to, as long as, again, it's their free speech to exercise. So yeah, free speech is just one of those things that it feels like now people want to decide what is what. And look, I think free speech, when it comes to the government talking about it, all speech is okay. As much speech as you can logically allow. I've always said, and I think this is probably the one thing me and Charlie can agree on, is that there really isn't anything like, look, free speech is one of those things where you either have to really set that hard line stance, okay? If you want free speech, you have to be willing to live with speech that you personally don't agree with, right? It's because if you can if you can deal with speech that you don't agree with, it protects you down the road when you say something that, everyone else doesn't agree with. Free speech and the laws that surround it are meant to protect people that often have the most uninviting opinions, often have the opinions that are usually meant to be shunned. You don't want to live in a society that's just one giant hug box or hive mind. You want to have and foster a diversity of opinions. And that can only happen when you actually protect free speech for what it fucking is. Now, to go back to the Discord messages that had happened with Tyler Robinson, this sparked a new wave of discussion by the government. The government's gotten this hard on for going after, again, what they consider to be radicalization. I'm not going to deny that radicalization isn't a thing. It absolutely has become a thing. And it's such a thing where in the Oversight Committee, the chairman now invites the CEOs of Discord, Steam, Twitch, and Reddit to testify on the radicalization of online forum users. So inside here, the chairman writes, the politically motivated assassination of Charlie Kirk claimed the life of a husband, father, and American patriot. In the wake of this tragedy, and amid other acts of politically motivated violence, Congress has a duty to oversee the online platforms that radicals have used to advance political violence. To prevent future radicalization and violence, the CEOs must appear before the Oversight Committee and explain what actions they've taken to ensure that the platforms are not exploited for nefarious purposes. Now look, we've talked a lot about radicalization, and there's been studies that have showed that when it comes to a lot of online platforms, there can be a situation where platforms and their algorithms push people to more extremist content. For instance, at the UC Davis, their researchers tested YouTube's recommendations engine over time. So for instance, YouTube tends to recommend videos that are similar to what people have already watched. So depending on which side of the aisle you're on, let's say you start from like a moderate content creator. So in the realm of politics, I would imagine Shoe on Head would be a pretty moderate leftist. Now, if you start watching a bit of Shoe on Head, you know, she will eventually take you down a rabbit hole, not with her intention, but the recommended algorithm should take you down to more extreme left content creators. And the same can go for the right content creators. So over time, because of how these algorithms work, and they're just designed to feed you what you want to consume, you're going to go down the pipelines of whatever it is on the internet, of possible extremism. So they say, it does recommend videos that mostly match a user's ideology. And for right-leaning users, those videos often come from channels that promote extremism, conspiracy theories, and other types of problematic content. So again, I just want to name the possible political bias of this article might be more left-leaning than we want to look at. But of course, the actual research is salient. So the research team created 100,000 sock puppet accounts on YouTube to test the platform's recommendation. A sock puppet is an automated account that mimics an actual person using the platform, just like actual YouTube users. Altogether, these sock puppets watched nearly 10 million YouTube videos from 120,000 channels that reflected ideological categories from the far left to the far right. To identify the political slant of a YouTube channel, the team cross-referenced the Twitter accounts of political figures that each channel followed. So each of the actual sock puppet accounts watched 100 randomly sampled videos from its assigned ideology for 30 seconds each. After watching the videos, the sock puppet's homepage recommendations were collected. The up next recommendations for a randomly selected video were also collected, and these showed what videos a real user would likely watch by passively following the video recommendation. So what you see on the right-hand side of the video player. So in their research, extremist content effectively becomes self-reinforcing. Without requiring any additional input from people using the platform, the recommendations on their own can activate a cycle of exposure to more and more problematic videos. And again, this is coming from Muhammad Haroon, a doctoral student in computer science in the College of Engineering. Ultimately, at the end, it's not just YouTube that causes it. And it's interesting to me that YouTube, X, and Meta were actually completely absent from being called by the Oversight Committee. I don't know whether they've been kissing the ass of the administration too hard, but if you're gonna call any of these social media services, you better just call fucking all of them. I feel like this came from a real political heaviness. There's plenty of left-leaning creators that have said some wild shit on Twitch. Enough to the point that Dan Clancy ends up getting this letter. Dear Dan Clancy, this is the CEO of Twitch, by the way. The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform requests your testimony at a hearing on Wednesday, October 8th, 2025. At 10 a.m. in room HVC 2010. The hearing will examine radicalization of online forum users, including incidents of open incitement to commit violent, politically motivated acts. So again, I think a lot of this is coming from a place of political motivation as well. And this is not good to me to see for one reason and one reason only. If this was done like without the if this was done outside the vacuum of the Charlie Kirk assassination, I would be all for it, simply because extremism occurs realistically on both sides of the spectrum, right? Extremism is never good. You always want to have people that are willing to engage in debate. You never want to have people writing ooh-woo on fucking, bullets and sending them into people's hearts. That's not how you fucking handle any form of discourse. Radicalization is bad no matter what. Simple as that. You don't want to deal with any of it. But I feel like for them specifically targeting platforms like Twitch is interesting when I see the same amount of radicalization on platforms like X, Meta, or even YouTube to an extent. Lots of these social media platforms are bad when it comes to their fucking algorithms and where they push users. But this whole oversight, to me at least, feels like it's coming simply by using this poor guy's death. All right, simple as that. Like, this guy's death is being used as a way to push a new control on people's free speech. Because ultimately, if the government is going after this stuff, and it's not just this, there are other situations as well. Now, I'd be interested to see how Dan Clancy and a lot of these CEOs handle their, apparent, oversight committee meeting, because ultimately they're going to have to go up in front and testify and explain what kind of extremist content exists. And I'm sure that they'll probably bring up just as many examples for the right as they should bring for the left, as they should bring for anything. There should just be extremist things. Ultimately, I think a lot of these guys have probably let certain things go on their platform that should have been moderated a long time ago. Ultimately, look, I said this like a year ago, or 2 years ago, however long ago, that ultimately if these platforms don't equally and properly enforce their terms of service, especially when it comes to political extremism, like, people are getting really comfortable by, just saying, hey, this person needs to die, this person is the worst thing in the world. There's a lot of extremism that is building up and bubbling. It's not just that extreme left, it's also the extreme right, and it's been like this for fucking years. Engaging online and having a healthy debate is just a thing of the past. And that's where I think a lot of these, when this committee comes together and discusses this, I hope ultimately we reach some level of healthy consensus, and it's not just used as a vector to attack free speech and just start policing what's going to go down. Look, for me, I've already seen what's been going on the last few months with internet censorship, internet control, chat control, and for years, I've always been talking and raising awareness about how the government wants to start controlling and monitoring the speech that we have on the internet constantly. And I think there is no better tragedy than Charlie Kirk's assassination than to be the possible reason that the government is going to use to really start surveilling us even harder. That's at least what I think is going to be the way forward. All this talk about let's address the extremism, let's talk about this Discord application or Steam or any of this shit is a smokescreen for the government to, in my opinion, start invoking more control on our speech, start monitoring what we say, just so that, they really can make us act a lot differently or just keep us subjugated in the last bastion of true online freedom. At least that's where I'm kind of getting to. And, if it's one thing that, I may never agree with a lot of things that Charlie Kirk would have said, but if it's one thing I think me and him probably could find really good common ground on is free speech is important. Debate is obviously very important. And the government should not be this involved, or the government should really not be trying to define what the fuck free speech or hate speech or any of this stuff kind of is. Is there a real question to be had about actual online radicalization? Yes. But I think that everything that has surrounded this talk, given the vacuum that we're in right now, the hotbed that we're in, I think all of it's coming from a place of severely bad faith. But that's just where I have to kind of sit into it. I think a lot of these platforms are fucked right now. I think, when it comes to especially Reddit and Twitch, look, man, their TOS and their sites have kind of let some of the most inflammatory shit fester for so long. And on both sides. Realistically, it's not a good situation. These sites have failed to moderate. They've failed to keep a lot of the most extreme dregs of it down. It's to a point where, I'll be real, I think Reddit, I think is a place where, in some ways it could be worse than even Poll from 4chan. It can just be a terrible place to be on. And it can be a place where people just keep getting into more and more extremes depending on which communities they interact with. And Reddit could have dealt with it years ago. They honestly could have. But it's gotten to a point where, the government is now calling their CEOs, and they're probably going to try pushing for ways to have more control over our speech, more control on our systems. And I never see any form of, anytime the government wants to govern us harder, Daddy, it always seems like a bad thing to me, okay? But then again, who knows? Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.